fucking niggas since the fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
One of the big news items that we didn't get to cover, and this is still fresh news, and I think it's extremely relevant to everyone, was the big psychological news, and I think you must have come across this because this was the talk of the town, that serotonin imbalance is no longer seen as a link to depression.
Yeah, somebody, I mean, I didn't pick that up on my own. Somebody had put that in the chat recently, but that was really interesting. Yeah.
Depression is not caused by a chemical imbalance. That is the headline of the weekend. Or at least there's no evidence backing the serotonin hypothesis of depression. So this is what researchers with the University College London have found after conducting a meta-analysis, which is a high-quality review of dozens of studies, and it was published in a peer-reviewed journal. So this is the gold standard of psychological research. They summarized their research by saying there's no consistent evidence of there being an association between serotonin and depression, and no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lowered serotonin activity or concentrations.
To really establish the scope of the importance of this. So that is to say that the common gospel within the psychological and psychiatric community was that if you're depressed or you have some kind of emotional imbalance, that has a lot to do with serotonin. So if you're feeling down, what they'll do is they'll give you antidepressants. This is the wide-reaching prescription rate of antidepressants. And antidepressants, obviously, anyone who's been on them will tell you, have all kinds of side effects, have all kinds of mood, either enhancement or destabilizations, changes how you think.
Then the side effects that occur early and tend to persist throughout treatment are the sexual side effects and emotional blunting. And the side effects that occur later in treatment are weight gain, and then, of course, the withdrawal if you come off the medications. In my opinion, the side effects that every clinician should talk about more when presenting the side effects to patients are the sexual side effects, the emotional blunting, and the weight gain. And the reason why I say that these are the ones that should be talked about is because they're the ones that tend to persist, and they're the ones that the patients tend to worry the most about. I also think it's important to emphasize that there's major variance in terms of the side effects that each individual patient experiences, and there's major variance in terms of the severity of the side effects. And then the side effects that should be talked about that are rare or population specific, which include suicidal thoughts in patients 24 and younger, QTc prolongation in cardiac patients, drug-drug interactions in patients taking other medications, bipolar switching in patients with a family history of psychosis or bipolar, the increased bleeding risk, especially in patients taking other anticoagulants, hyponatremia, especially in elderly patients, and then the rare, scary side effect, which is serotonin syndrome.
If we would like to get conspiratorial, and you know I do, it's been pointed out that a lot of the school shooters that we've had, some of the more random ones, were on what we call SSRIs, or antidepressants.
Mass shootings last year in Colorado and Connecticut have reignited the gun control debate. But there's another more underground debate linking shootings to drugs.
Legal drugs, specifically antidepressants. The internet is awash in websites that claim withdrawal from selective serotonin reintake inhibitors, or SSRIs, can lead to violence. The theory is not widely accepted by the medical community, but it's not going away either.
So the thing that matters is these are being prescribed to kids. Those are the two big things that are always prescribed to kids: antidepressants and like Ritalin or Adderall. Those are like the three. I think Ritalin and Adderall are kind of the same thing, but those are the two. You get kids on these drugs, and the idea was, oh, they're depressed, they're imbalanced, so we must bring them into balance. Now, at first, you might hear that and say, oh, what Alex Jones episode did he listen to or hear this? We'll get to that in a second. Alex Jones, what he's going through. But like, I'm looking at psychology today. This is in the mainstream. This isn't just a fringe thing. I'm not saying that validates it more, but just say this is something that even the big wigs, the muckety mucks up on Parliament Hill are talking about. So I'm going to read you the headline here. And we're going to go to Cope City. Next stop, Cope City. Ring ding ding. All right. So it's under the heading depression, because they have a whole thing for it. Serotonin imbalance found not to be linked to depression. New research overturns a long-held understanding of how antidepressants work. So this long-held understanding would be that antidepressants do work. What they're saying is we don't know what they do something, but I can tell you what they don't do is help with depression.
Yeah.
So here, and it's psychologytoday.com, key points at the top. New research reviewing huge bodies of scientific evidence found no direct link between serotonin and depression. Now, also serotonin, this name comes up a lot. If you've ever done MDMA, if you've ever done ecstasy, serotonin is a thing in your, physiological makeup, that it is a chemical and it does things, and you can trigger influxes of serotonin to make you feel good. So they thought, depression must be a deficit of serotonin. That was the transitive property. They just said, okay, so maybe that's what it is. Apparently no link. So next point, depression is therefore not just the result of having too little serotonin, but may be related to more complex brain chemistry. Antidepressants, including SSRIs, remain an effective treatment. We just need to better understand why and how they work. Okay, just going to pause on that. I'm going to repeat that. I want people to really kind of just clench your fists. Okay, assume the angry listening pose. This is what I do when I hear something I don't like. Okay, sit, shoulders squared, knees apart, a sitting power stance, hips as wide as possible, clenched fists on the table, elbows parallel. Now, listen. Antidepressants, including SSRIs, remain an effective treatment. We just need to better understand why and how they work. What? Just really, let's just run that through the ringer, and that's okay. All right. The last thing is, recent theory suggests antidepressants might have more important effects on neuroplasticity than just serotonin levels. So they're also admitting that these SSRIs, these antidepressants, have wider reaching effects on your brain, the physical makeup of your brain, than just serotonin. So within this, they've said, we don't know what they do. We know that they do a bunch of stuff they're not supposed to do. And we just really need to figure out why it's doing what it's doing. So if you're on our side, if you are more on the conspiratorial side of things, and I don't even know why this would be conspiracy. This is just saying maybe the pills we're taking are causing some problems. If we were to say, hey, we see a common thread with a lot of these school shooters that they are on SSRIs, and then that seems to affect perhaps their empathy, perhaps some kind of psychosis is introduced. Mm-hmm. Well, this just seems to be an admission of that. And what really, how should I say this? Well, let's say this. What really troubles me is the very real possibility that no one will hang for this. Because I think that needs to happen. I think, and I said this about COVID too. Now, I'm not trying to compel people to violence. I'm just saying it seems obvious to me that when such negligence at this scale occurs.
Warning. Incoming irony.
There needs to be people hanging from street lamps.
Humiliation.
Now, and we could also say this, if we want to appeal to a wider demographic with this idea, that's what should have happened after the financial collapse, the mortgage crisis. Everyone said we should hang a couple of bankers.
Many such cases.
A couple of people at Goldman Sachs. We have some people who are, we're just doing my job. There's a few masterminds behind all this. Something's got to happen. Because I think one person went to jail over that. No one goes to jail. I got one for you. Here's one blast from the past. If anyone recalls this, thalidomide.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
So this was let's go to what thalidomide was if people don't recall. It was a proposed as a leprosy treatment or a cancer treatment. And it was also prescribed to mothers during the first trimester of pregnancy. So this was around the late 50s and the 60s. It was this over-the-counter drug that many mothers were taking, and then they started noticing a lot of birth defects. So I'll read a part here. Just this from Wikipedia, but this backs up everything else I read. So in the late 1950s and early 1960s, more than 10,000 children in 46 countries were born with deformities such as phocomelia, as a consequence of thalidomide use. The severity and location of the deformities depend on how many days into the pregnancy the mother was before beginning treatment.
The hallmark defining quality of thalidomide was its safety.
So safe that in Germany there was no prescription needed.
The German company that developed thalidomide, Chemie Grunenthal, claimed that even pregnant women could take it.
The drug company had handed out samples of this drug all over the place, starting with employees of its own company. On Christmas Day in 1956, a baby girl was born in Germany without ears. And she was the daughter of an employee of the drug company Grunenthal.
No immediate connection was made to thalidomide, which soon sold nearly as well as aspirin in some European countries.
So we're talking about damage to legs, we're talking extra toes, we're talking people with heads that don't work. It is not known exactly how many worldwide victims of the drug there have been, although estimates range from 10,000 to 20,000. Despite the side effects, thalidomide was sold in pharmacies in Canada up until 1962. And we can go into look at that, look at the quality of life stuff, look at, thalidomide was successfully marked as a safer alternative to barbiturates. Due to a successful marketing campaign, thalidomide was widely used by pregnant women during the first trimester of pregnancy. So we won't go into the details of that. So it's like, okay, this was a pharmaceutical company that released this. They lied, they marketed, they killed, and I believe, hold on, the study was, it had a 40% of the babies died. So the 40% died, the rest born with deformities, little tiny T-Rex arms. There's people, you can find cases of this. Point being that, as far as I know, nothing happened to the people responsible for this. And I think to have a functioning civilization, you need that. I think you need a bit of barbarity. I think you need a bit of savagery. This is why I'm a defender of the death penalty. Sorry, continue.
Well, look, no, I don't. That's what's part of the thing that's interesting to me is that is considered barbarity, and it's funny because you just said it. In order to have a functioning civilization, you need to include that barbarity. But barbarity and civilization can't coexist. So what are we actually saying? What we're saying is that people who are responsible for the deaths of children are publicly executed. That is civilized. That's the civilized thing to do.
I was reading this book recently. I don't know if I have too much to talk about it, but hold on, let me pull it up here. Yeah, I read this book and I wasn't very thrilled with it. And to be honest, I'm not loving a lot of the conspiracy theory books I've got. And we've read a few. We read a lot of David Icke. We read a lot about, the Bilderberg Group, and we read about, some stuff that crosses into conspiracy that's not like just the history of central banking. That is what it is. It is just history. But, Behold a Pale Horse, things like that. But I find that they're not written particularly well. And some people say that can be ignored, but I don't really think it can. Because if you're writing a book about something that is supposed to be serious, they use a lot of very flowery, over-the-top language. Like, I was reading this book. The book is Tavistock Institute, Social Engineering the Masses, by Daniel Estulin. And this is a book that gets brought up a lot, it's passed around a lot, because the Tavistock Institute is a real organization. And it does have an impact on the world.
Young people struggling with their gender identity may be referred to England's only specialist clinic, the Gender Identity Development Service, or GIDS, based at London's Tavistock and Portman Foundation Trust.
And it's on the radar of a lot of conspiracy-minded people. And so I'm not saying conspiracy theory in a dismissive way. I'm saying that this is real, and it's on the map, and it gets brought up with the Bilderberg Group. It gets brought up with the Trilateral Commission. You see these names floating around, and they're brought up because they do exist, and they're staffed by people, and they have websites, and they have addresses, and they have people who have it on their fucking LinkedIn profile. So it's not like it's made up out of whole cloth, just like the Freemasons. The Freemasons are real. But I find that even describing them, they veer into over-the-top language. Like in the introduction to this book, yeah, like in the intro of the book, you'll say, this book will land with the impact of a 15,000 megaton bomb. And I'm just thinking, well, it didn't. So it was released a while ago. Like, this wasn't the nuclear device released in 2015. So it wasn't. But a lot of these books like that, like, once this gets published, this will cause the mass awakening. Like, just stop talking like that. And this shouldn't bother me. Grammatical errors, typos, very stream of consciousness writing styles where you can tell you put a comma here because you wanted a serious pause, and putting in the 3 dots that are 3 periods that are supposed to represent a pregnant pause. I'm like, just don't even, you're not writing this to be read correctly. But, I'm reading it, and the problem is that it's something that people should have on their radar as well. That you should care about the Tavistock Institute. And the main complaint I had about this book was it doesn't really talk about the Tavistock Institute that much. That's maybe in the first couple chapters, but like a lot of these conspiracy books, they can't contain themselves. So after the first couple chapters, now it's the JFK assassination. Now it's the CIA. The rest of the book's just about the fucking CIA. It's like, the Tavistock Institute, and we'll get into what it actually is because it is relevant, but the Tavistock Institute had its connections to the CIA. Now let's talk about the CIA, rest of the book. Let's talk about Vietnam. Let's talk about the moon landing. And it just goes off. Like, no, just all I want to do is find a book just about the history of the Tavistock Institute. Just about the biographies of the people who ran it, what it does. Give me an example of actual campaigns. This book doesn't have that. You got to look that up yourself. Go to the Tavistock Institute website if you want. Go to tavinstitute.org. Terrible name. tavinstitute.org, all one word. You can look it up. It's a real thing. And it is in the news, and it's on Wikipedia, and you can look it up. But I'm like, from a book of this, a lot of these conspiracy theory books, I find lack, not all of them do this, but some of them lack the actual source data. And this book, like, it says it's got a lot of sources, but then you check the sources at the end of every chapter, it really only sources like 2 books throughout the entire book. And you can't do that. You can't just write a book where your only source is another book, because that just means you read another book and wanted to summarize it.
That's
and the rest of and the rest of them are just from this one website that I think he publishes. So you can't cite your own website as a source. You fucking asshole. You absolute asshole.
Good try though. A for effort. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, but again, I come back to that. It's important that you got to know. And I just wish that the advocates of this stuff did a better job of writing it. And I'm not trying to get into an optics thing, but it's very clearly written by amateurs who don't really take it seriously. An example of a good version of something like this would be the book we covered on the Franklin scandal. The Franklin controversy, conspiracy, whatever, about, we have a whole clip on that. People go watch that about the Franklin. You can look it up if you need a little summary of it. But that book was written it had a lot of sources, and it was written in a professional, arguably journalistic way. But a lot of these are, you start with something, and then within a few moments, you're talking about Satan. You're talking about how they're doing Satan's bidding. And I'm like, I think you need to do this without mentioning Satan.
Yeah.
I think you need to mention this without having these little tangents where you're complaining about political theory, like you're complaining about Marxism, and I know you don't have a firm grasp on Marxism.
Yeah.
All your education about Marxism is that it is just Satanism, and that can't be it.
It's frustrating too with Tavistock, because like Tavistock, there's so much stuff that they do that you don't even have to get into conspiracy. If you just talk about the public stuff that they do, and if you're arguing reasonably to the everyman, this is not savory stuff. This is stuff that people will disagree with, right? You don't have to even talk about Marxism. You don't have to talk about the fucking Rockefellers or the Rothschilds or any of this. Tavistock is bad. It's fucking bad juju, just right on the face of it. So bring it into Satanism. It's almost like again, everything's a psyop these days, right? But it's almost like a little bit of a psyop that somebody's writing this in order to discredit it as a theory. Like, well, no, if everybody who thinks that Tavistock is crazy is actually a person who believes that Tavistock are Satan worshippers, then maybe Tavistock's actually okay. Like, no, they're not okay. They're objectively, measurably a force for evil, but you don't have to talk about Satan in order to prove that. So
yeah, you can look at the history. So go to the website and you can get a pretty good overview of what they do. Look at our work. Look at who we are. What is the Tavistock Institute? The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations applies social science to contemporary issues and problems. It was established as a not-for-profit organization with charitable purpose in 1947. We work across the public, private, community, and voluntary sectors with research organizations and industry in Britain, Europe, and further afield. A lot of this is written in a very corporate way. But what, by their own admission, if you want to know what they do is their consultancy. They try to apply social engineering to world issues. That's what they do, by their own admission. So it's up to the detractors to say why that doesn't matter. And I don't believe it doesn't matter. So they look at any world event. This is kind of like George Soros. I think George Soros doesn't matter. Now we can say maybe he's not the puppet master of the whole world, but we know he's got a lot of money. We know where his investments are, and we know that he talks openly about what he wants to do. So you can't tell me that it's not relevant. There's only one wrong answer, and the wrong answer is saying it's not relevant. Now, once we establish that, we can build up what it is that they do and what they're responsible for. Because, again, look at the website. It's all about consultancy, research, art and organization, professional development. They're going into corporations. They're giving reports on things. And this would have started back during World War II. The Tavistock Institute was founded to work with British intelligence. And the Tavistock Institute comes up quite a bit in reference to military intelligence and psyops. And this is how they get connected to the CIA. Because the CIA, a lot of what the military does, they fund things. The military, American military, for example. Let's use them because they have a lot of money. Oftentimes, what they do is they just shop around. There are certain things that they run and they control, and they run their own experiments. But a lot of the times, they're also open to other NGOs, other research areas that are outside the military. They see there's some work being done and say, "Oh, let's invest in that. Let's buy that. Let's partner with them. Let's use their data." And a lot of this data is researched for the purpose of giving it to the government. Point being that their relationship with the government is how you draw a direct line to MK Ultra, to psychological operations. Because the Tavistock Institute, let's start with this. Okay. Here's the trick that a lot of NGOs will play. And I can say this, a lot of people can say this because it's plainly obvious, but I say this from the perspective of someone who has worked with NGOs in the past, because I work in marketing, and so is my wife. We've worked with NGOs at various points. NGOs as an entity on the world stage are curious because they all wear the same mask. You hear NGO, it's a non-government organization. But every NGO is different. But they're set up so that from the outside, they all kind of look the same. They all look nondescript. They all look kind of safe. Same with the World Economic Forum. They all have the same kind of website. They got the same mission statement. But what's interesting is once you get into these organizations and you look around and you talk to the people, the staffs are very different. Each NGO, while they have the same kind of faceplate, have different people running them with different goals. So certain NGOs will be run by mainly economic-minded people. Like they're just business people trying to solve an economic issue. I'll give you one example. Here's an example. There are several NGOs in the world that are trying to eradicate pedophilia. Actually, let me walk that back. They're trying to eradicate child rape. And pedophilia is one form of that. Now, they all say that they're trying to stop the scourge of child molestation and rape. Each one of these has a different way they're going to do that. So if you talk to one, it might be full of doctors, medical doctors who are trying to detect the child rape and stop it. Another one will be staffed by psychologists. And those psychologists are trying to detect pedophiles to get them arrested, right, from their behavior. Another one is trying to detect pedophiles to help them, to reach out to them, to stop them before they commit the crime. All three of these organizations have the exact same mission statement and type of website and logo and stuff. All three of them will state they have the same goal. All three of them have very, very different things they're actually trying to do. So with the Tavistock Institute, it looks like anything else. It's trying to solve social issues. But what separates the Tavistock Institute from any of these other NGOs? And this is by design, by the way. This is so that people don't actually look into it. Now, The one thing that I can find about the Tavistock Institute that everyone kind of agrees on is it's in psychology and psychiatry, and that the Tavistock Institute, within its bowels, is strictly about trying to find psychological and psychiatric solutions to problems. They're concerned about the human mind. They're concerned about how the human mind works and how it can be controlled, and social engineering. And they won't call it, social engineering might be a phrase that they used in the past that they don't like to use anymore. There's probably other phrases we could use, social coordination. We talked about that book Nudge not long ago about how you can introduce certain games and certain boundaries in society that force people to make binary decisions that they would otherwise not normally make. Things like that. So when they say social engineering, it's like brainwashing. It's like, kind of, yeah, it can be. It can be, experimenting to see what effect mass SSRIs have on a nation. That could be one. They could be. This is what the military does all the time. This is what MK Ultra was, for people who don't. So just to refresh people's memory, my read on MK Ultra, people hear that. Some people think acid. They think LSD. They think of, they gave the Unabomber a bunch of LSD and he went crazy and set letter bombs. What MK Ultra was really about, and this book kind of touches on it, and people who know things know this, MK Ultra was really about experimenting with trauma. MK Ultra and its various other titles, because keep in mind, it didn't go away. Experimenting with trauma to see, does trauma in different severities at different times, different inputs, can we break people to make them more manipulated? And they would obviously experiment on soldiers first. So there's a lot of soldiers who went through this. Everything, and there's this book I read we're going to cover in the future called On Killing, that goes into this, about how they experimented with how to condition soldiers to kill. And typically how you condition soldiers to kill is through drilling through the motions, but they also introduce it to breaking them psychologically, to how they respond to aggression. How do you change how they respond to aggression? You expose them to an insane amount of aggression and see what happens. Yeah. Essentially, you traumatize them. You can traumatize them with drugs. You can traumatize them with torture. You can traumatize them with all different kinds of things, threats, chemicals, and they tried all of this. And the Tavistock Institute, I believe, and many believe, was at the center of this because, like Sigmund Freud, like every other psychologist, they were keenly interested from a scientific perspective in this sort of thing. I'll give you another example, but from a different field, to show what the types of minds that are interested in this, why it doesn't seem so far off that they would even do something like this. So a lot of people, and we brought this up before, but Alfred Kinsey was a sex researcher, and he was one of the first big, in the news, in the magazines, doing the fucking talk show circuit about human sexuality. And he was there's a lot of issues with his research, and it's not really taken seriously anymore, because all he was trying to do was get the sexual histories on a wide spectrum of Americans, different races, different sexualities. But he found it all fascinating from a scientific point of view. And so he was also interviewing pedophiles. He was interviewing rapists. He was interviewing degenerates of all stripes. In fact, that was what skewed his data, which is why it's not taken seriously, because it turns out that the people who would jump at the chance to take his studies weren't normal people. And so it ended up being that his view of how normal Americans think was skewed towards the sexually degenerate. And this is where you get that idea that everyone deep down is a fucking sex freak. That's not true. He just interviewed sex freaks and assumed that was everyone, because those are the types of people who would like to take his 2-hour-long survey and interview. Anyway, point being that he found pedophiles and rapists fascinating from a scientific point of view. So, we would be repulsed by that. And there's a movie with Liam Neeson where he plays Albert. It's Alfred or Albert. It might be Alfred, but it's a good enough movie, but that's where it gets subversive, because it actually is very good. And he's portrayed as this, I'm just on the side of science. That was actually pretty good Liam Neeson, I think.
Yeah, that was good.
So the idea was that, it's proposed as just a scientific thing, but that's the type of mind that would be interested in this. They would not turn down the opportunity to get the data from, I want to know what happens if you give a guy who's killed 3 Vietnamese people civilians. Let's say they're civilians. Like, we know that he accidentally killed them. Let's give them like 9 tabs of acid and yell at them. That is a Tavistock experiment, because that's never been done before. We got to experiment with trauma. So the idea with things like the Tavistock Institute is they are the claim made by the book, and I think this is an interesting claim, and I'd like to maybe play around in this sandbox for a while, is that they are trying to export insanity to the fucking world as a form of social control.
Yeah.
Now, the claims made in the book, I don't really subscribe to. So he gives a few claims that I straight up disagree with. So, for example, he believes that he's very much a not a libertarian, but a liberal-minded guy. So he'll make the claim, for example, that the default position is sort of the self-interested individual. And he claims in the book that people need to be tricked into identifying other individuals as members of a group. So he believes that the Tavistock Institute introduced into society this idea of identifying people by race or like ethnicity. Wow. And group. And that's like the default is that everyone kind of gets along. I'm like, well, that's just not true.
That's silly.
I'm not making that up. He says that in the book, and that he says the individual is only corrupted by social groups. And he had said, he makes one claim in this book that I was kind of thunderstruck by. He said the entire concept of teamwork was invented by the Tavistock Institute to control brilliant people through peer pressure. Yeah, the idea of working as a team was invented in America, invented in Britain in the late 1940s, because we need a way to tamp down brilliant people through peer pressure.
That'd be where I stop reading, probably, I think.
Well, that's where I'm like, okay, this is just fucking dope. It makes me doubt everything that came before, which sucks, because it's a real thing that consults with some of the biggest corporations in the world, that has its hooks in the British government, that like it's there, it's relevant. But then you tell me that they nefariously invented working as a team. I'm out. Fuck you.
Yeah.
And now I look at the back and look at this guy, and he's just got a fucked up looking head. I don't,
Always do a physiognomy check first.
Physiognomy check on Daniel Estulin. I don't like it. I'm casting X-nay on that. There's some things there's stuff like that's wrong. There's some stuff where it sounds like there could be something to it, and it lines up with when we had covered Hidden Scenes Inside the Laurel Canyon, which is a book about, really what it's about is the involvement of the CIA within the Laurel Canyon movement in the 60s, where all those psychedelic fucking musicians were around. It was this new hip, cool hippie place, and the involvement in CIA with perhaps the proliferation of psychedelic drugs or the experimentation of that. I'm like, okay, there's something there, but you'll say that the popularization itself of psychedelic drugs was a way to distract youthful rebellion into something benign, which was a tactic pioneered, he claims, by the CIA by way of Tavistock. And like, there's something there. There is something there. This idea that one way to distract a antisocial, not an antisocial, but a rebellious movement of youth from perhaps overtaking the government or rising up is to distract them with just sex and drugs and rock and roll, to just take the wind out of those sails. Like, I can believe that, sure, and I can believe that as a pioneered as a pacification technique. Like, you've got an uprising. How can you dispel an uprising? Because they know how to cause them. We know the CIA is interested in causing uprisings and triggering those. They must also have a way to tamp those down if they want to, and to take the foot off that gas, right?
Right.
So I'm like, okay, there's something there, but it'll be like, oh, I don't think they came up with the idea of, giving people acid, maybe. He'll say like the counterculture movement of the 60s was wholly invented in Britain and imposed on the US. You make a claim like that, I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Like the British invented, like maybe there is something to be said that British music and punk rock but now you're getting into a debate about who invented punk rock, which I don't want to do. You
got me asking for sources, and that's a shame.
Yeah, but he'll say stuff like any. And some people might agree with this, that any sort of federal police is fascist, because he's basically talking about how the Tavistock Institute is trying to install fascism and his understanding of fascism, which is some authority you don't like. I'm like, I don't think so, because fascists also hate the Tavistock Institute.
Yeah.
But you'll say like the RCMP is fascist because only fascists have any sort of like federal police. I'm like, well, like every country in the world has like a federal level police department.
Yes, correct.
So then every country in the world is fascist. I'm like, but that's the type of quagmire you get yourself into if you start going down. But like his mission statement for this is that they're trying to popularize fascism, whereas some people would say they're actually trying to export communism or Marxism, but they can't. It requires a very loose understanding of what Marxism and fascism are. But if you see fascism as just a form of control I don't like, then I guess everything bad is fascist, which is unironically what liberals believe. But that doesn't get you very far, does it?
Yeah.
And he'll make claims in the book, but he doesn't develop them. Like he'll say the connective tissue between all of these individuals in the Tavistock Institute is that they're members of the Royal Arch Freemasons. You know, so that now we're getting into Freemasonry. I'm like, okay, let's spend a book about that. But this is what frustrates me about some of these writers. They'll say stuff like that, but then they won't go into it at all.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, what does that mean? Who are they? Go into explain to me the Freemasons, explain to me their relevance, give me the bios on them and how that form of control, why does that form of control matter? But they never do. They just connect dots and say, that's coincidence. I'm like, I let's say it's not a coincidence, but you need to say why that matters.
Yeah.
Like, let's not forget, because I've read a lot of books on Freemasons and they're kind of like, oh yeah, they're very materialist and universalist. It's like, okay, well, you need to explain to me how that maps on specifically to what they're doing. Because it's just like the Skull and Bones Society. I'm like, I can believe that all these Ivory Tower dynasty family people go to the same school and clubs and shit, but I need a little bit more than just they know each other and shake each other's hands. If you're saying they shake each other's hands at orgies, now you got something. I'm there with you. If you give me a different location other than rich boys being kind of gay with each other and being flouncy and walking around like it's another type of country club, I need just a bit more than that. I need more than a connected dot there. And, you know, but the Tavistock Institute has also its hooks in the Frankfurt School. And he kind of outlines it here, just to give it a bit of credit. I'm going to read just a little bit from page 87 here. One of the crowning ironies of the now generation of 1964 on is that for all its protestations of utter modernity, none of its ideas or artifacts was less than 30 years old. And it says, quote here, the political theory came completely from the Frankfurt School. Lucien Goldman, a French radical who was visiting a professor at Columbia University in 1968, was absolutely correct when he said that Herbert Marcuse in 1969 that the, quote, student movements found in his works and ultimately in his works alone the theoretical formulation of their problems and aspirations. The long hair and sandals, the free love communes, the macrobiotic food, the liberated lifestyles had been designed at the turn of the century and thoroughly field tested by various Frankfurt School connected New Age social experiments like the Ascona Commune before 1920. Even Tom Hayden's defiant never trust anyone over 30 quote was merely a less urbane version of Rupert Brooke's 1905 quote, nobody over 30 is worth talking to. The social planners who shaped 1960s simply relied on already available materials, taking an entire charade one step further beyond sanity and into the world of super drugs to be used for behavior modification and mind control tasking, a key that would eventually allow unfettered access to the human mind. So I actually kind of like that quote. There's a lot there that I like because there's things that we do know. We do know about mind alteration and mind experiments being done at the highest levels of the intelligence community. We do know that. We do know that, you know, because it makes sense. If you're the CIA, if you are these shadowy government organizations that we do know exist, you do have to ask the question, where did they get these ideas? They would have had to get them from psychologists. Now, would the CIA have staff psychologists? Probably not really. They would need to source them from elsewhere. A lot of the biggest projects instigated by the CIA were sourced from, they always talk about the Nazi scientists they brought over. Well, that's one. They love sourcing people from outside the organization. So the entire story of Tavistock, just to revisit, this is what I do believe. This is what, without question, do believe that the Tavistock Institute is a front, not a front as in a facade, but like a front in a war. They are the vanguards, or the tip of the spear of psychology and psychiatry, trying to break into social engineering. So once you see who staffs this place, it is psychologists up and down. It's not economists, it's not businessmen, it's not politicians, it's not even doctors, it's strictly psychologists. So it is the weaponized psychiatry trying to infiltrate into politics. And that is what they do. If you read their website, read between the lines, that is essentially what they're saying. We are psychologists trying to control world events. That's what they say. So you can't disagree with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, of course. This is why I'm saying, like, you don't have to get into Satanism when they're literally, that's what they're doing. And look, they're not saying that. I don't think they're saying that very, literally. But you can read between the lines, like you said, with any other NGO. It's not hard to figure out what they're actually doing, and that is what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think once you attach who they actually are and what they do to them, it's relevant. Like, just to give you a murderer's row of who's involved in this. The Institute was founded by a group of key figures from the Tavistock Clinic and British Army psychiatry, including Elliot Jacques, Henry Dix, Leonard Brown, Ronald Hargraves, John Rawlings Rees, and that's a name we got to pay attention to. John Rawlings Rees, and this is a guy people can look up. He's a very interesting figure. Mary Love, Wilfred Bryan, and Tommy Wilson as chairman. So they were pulled from like psychiatry. They formed a group, and then that's what they try to do. So if you are asking the question, is there a mind war? Is there an info war? Yes, there is. Is the Tavistock Institute intimately involved in that? Perhaps even the founders of it. I would say yes. And can we do that without trying to lay it at the feet of Satan? I think we can. But that alone should be enough. That alone should make you wonder, like, who's listening to these people? Who are these corporations they're partnered with? There's a lot. There's a lot of governments that have commissioned them. You can make an inquiry through their website if you fucking want. Anyway, that's just, I wanted to talk about that, about this is where the SSRI stuff comes from. This is the role psychology and psychiatry itself has in the world. Because we tend to look at, as politically interested people, we look at ideologies, we look at politics, we look at politicians, we look at militaries, and we look at NGOs. But I think one thing we're going to get into in the next few episodes is the pronounced role of psychology and psychiatry in controlling world events. Now, some people will lay all world events at the feet of Tavistock. Now, that's not what I'm saying. Some people will say Tavistock is the core of everything wrong with the world. I don't believe that. I think there's other villains in this story. But I think we need to pay close attention to how the redefining of the human mind has impacted not only world events, but also our generations on a personal one-to-one level. For you and me, the drugs we're given, the way we are psychoanalyzed, the laws that are based upon these psychoanalyzations, the laws and the rules that are made to persecute people like us who think the wrong thing, or the idea that you can be mentally broken and you can be corralled in certain ways with certain stimuli and playing around with certain traumas. How can introducing certain traumas maybe not drive people insane, but maybe driving people insane is a form of pacification? And maybe that's one. And maybe the way let's say I'm working for Tavistock, maybe I show up and I write a report that essentially says, if you drive people into a state of near insanity, murder goes down. Now I'm listening. Now I'm Nancy Pelosi touching down in fucking Taipei saying, tell me more. Because really, all they need to do, whatever mechanisms they have, they can sell to the people in power by saying, this might bring rape down. Now, how you bring rape down might be also bringing birth rates down. But they don't really care about that. Maybe they kind of want that. But this is how you sell it to politicians. Like, under your watch, you can lead to a record low of rape and illegitimate births. Ooh, goody.
Yeah.
It just turns out that that's making half of all guys infertile. But
Yeah.
that's, you can't, that's just, we'll not pay attention to that. But these are the types of things that are being proposed by these people. And there's the claim in the book, and I don't know if this is true, but they claim that the Tavistock Institute was the pioneer of MK Ultra type things. Because if you look at MK Ultra, remember, like we just talked about, like MK Ultra could start off as getting a soldier and screaming at him in a room, and seeing if screaming at him and threatening him makes him more likely to follow orders. And that's all you really need to do. All they really need to do at the heart of this is make people follow orders. They're not really concerned about what the order is, and they're less and less concerned about what they need to do to get there. But they're convinced if people can follow orders, then that's good. That's less crime. That's less suicide. Maybe that's really what they believe, that brainwashing people means less despair. And that's easy to do. That's kind of what, if you think about it, that's what SSRIs do. And that's ironically what leads people to kill. It's like you feel fewer peaks and valleys. Yes, you're less depressed, you're less sad, but that also means you're less happy. But that's acceptable. It's more acceptable to them to have this sort of kind of vaguely miserable baseline of existence rather than ecstasy and misery. They're willing to say that we, in the interest of eliminating misery, we will fight happiness, and that is a fair compromise to them. And so, if you want to ask what the actual practical, boots on the ground, lived reality is of the Tavistock Institute, it's your kids on antidepressants. I guess that's kind of what we're trying to get at with all of this. Do you have any? And we won't get into the other kind of spiritual stuff about how they believe in the age of Aquarius, and how their goal is to change public interest away from spiritualism. That could be true, but I think what we just said is enough. Now, what do you think about that?
There's a war on for your mind, man. I don't know.
there is, and
yeah.
there is just to end on this, there is a connection between this and a work that people might have heard of before, which is, and you can find this online anywhere, it's called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Now, this is an interesting document. It claims to have been found in a surplus copy machine that was once owned by the CIA. Someone bought it, because they get rid of all these machines. You can buy them for cheap. Someone bought it, found a copy of this in the machine. It's allegedly an official internal document that outlines more or less what we're saying. It's called Secret Weapons for Quiet Wars. You can find it online. We won't go into it completely, because sometimes it's written in a way where it could be fake. Now, I'll just read the beginning of it and let people be the judge, and read the rest if you want. But it's essentially about how the World War III is happening right now, but it is a quiet war. And what is a quiet war? That means population control, because it is, what is the purpose of a war? Okay, well, it might be to hold territory. It might be to, really, you're invading a country to control it. You're not really trying to destroy a country in modern wars. You're trying to control it, trying to control the people. So all they're saying is there a way to control a nation and a people without marching on that nation and putting boots on the ground and occupying that land? Now, if you're a neo-realist or someone who's into geopolitics, you would say, well, no, you can't. You actually do need a physical presence in the country. But whatever. Let's just say at one point in the mid-20th century, they were exploring options for, hey, can we take over countries without actually sacrificing our boys or marching people or killing people? That's a messy enterprise. Anyway, so I'll just read the first paragraph here and you decide. It says, it is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of society, i.e. the engineering of social automation systems, silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself, and this is where I kind of think it's weird. It's like, it is in itself. I don't know if that's a way an internal document would be written. Whatever. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodologies for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or groups of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid and no agonizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity, and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without the loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. So basically, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is about, we're trying to solve these questions amorally. And by amorally, I mean without morals, without attention paid to spirituality or religiousness or anything. So, some people say this is a hoax. It's a fake document. It's something, that's not real. That's just for conspiracy people. It's difficult for me to believe that something like this wouldn't exist. We know documents like this are written at the highest levels of military intelligence all the fucking time, even just as a what if scenario. So even if this is fake, I guarantee you there's a document like this in circulation in some level of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that'd be my take too. It's like, although it seems, it doesn't just the way it's written, it doesn't seem like maybe they do write like that, but like you said, the fact that it's back to this thing we often say, is it conceivable? Do they have the motivation to do it? Then it's not about whether they're doing it. It's about, you got to prove to me, why wouldn't they? If they could conceal it and they want to do it, why on earth wouldn't they do it? So we know that they're almost certainly doing it. I don't know whether this is actually the memo, but yeah, they're doing it for sure.
Yeah, they're doing it because why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they try and figure out how to fight a war where there's no casualties? What they want is social control. And maybe they haven't mastered it yet. But that leads me to believe that, well, they've of course tried and failed at things. I think my read on the situation is a lot of the stuff we all talk about in these circles is just documenting their various failures. They're not happy with it, but they tried something and it failed, and they made a note, and then they moved on to something else. But that direction they're going in is still there. Anyway, that's all I really had to say.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.